Today we're taking a look at the all-new 2013 Cadillac XTS. At the moment in the Cadillac XTS, there's only one engine option, and this is a little bit interesting for Cadillac because, of course, the DTS and the STS both had V8s. The only engine option here is this 3.6-liter direct injection V6. Produces 304 horsepower, but only 264 pound-feet of torque. It's mated to General Motors' 6-speed automatic transmission and, of course, a Dykes all-wheel drive system. That puts this particular engine a decent notch behind the Lincoln MKS and its EcoBoost engine. The XTS easily has the best interior General Motors has made in a very, very, very long time. Very competitive with a number of the entries in this segment. Not quite as nice, if I'm perfectly honest, as the Volvo S80 or the BMW 5 Series. Fairly competitive with a Mercedes E-Class, if I'm honest, however, though. We have a nice stitched upper dash here. This is not leather, this is pleather in this particular model. We have real wood trim. We have nice, soft lower dash parts here as well. We have these sort of nickel-themed accents. Shiny black center console here. I'm not really a huge fan of these touch-sensitive controls, but then again, Lincoln is doing it, so why shouldn't Cadillac join the party? Everything here just has a very solid feel, which is quite nice as well. The steering wheel has a good feel as well. The buttons I'm not a huge fan of. We'll take a look at that in a bit when we go over Q. The airbag cover is not quite as nice as I would like, but really not that unusual in this segment either. There are a few quality issues though in this cabin still, and of course this is a press car, so one would have hoped that they were trying to impress the press. And over here we have some stitching that's not quite right, and we have sort of a crinkle in the leather that's right by the gauge cluster, so you're seeing it all the time. And the glove box is a little peculiar because when we're opening it, sometimes the glove box goes straight to the floor. Almost did it that time. Oh, there we go. See? That shouldn't happen. Let's see if it'll do it again. Nope. It's not every time, but as you can see, it's quite frequent. That's a little bit of a concern when you're paying nearly $60,000 for the car. No American car would be complete without an enormous back seat, and the Cadillac XTS delivers here as well. A fairly comfortable rear seat as well. This bottom cushion is a little bit low to the floor, but that's a complaint that's very common in the automotive industry right now. Even this center seat is fairly comfortable. I mean, I wouldn't want to do this long term, but you could actually fit 3 people in the back because the XTS is a fairly wide vehicle. Headroom is fairly decent. Our particular model doesn't have the sunroof, so the sunroof would impact rear seat headroom just a little bit. We have our third zone climate control back here, so we have our own controls and our own heated seats in this particular model. One interesting thing, however, especially for this particular segment, is that these rear seats fold, and they fold almost completely flat. That's of course because the XTS shares its platform with a number of other General Motors front-wheel drive vehicles, and so it shares this trunk pass-through as well. That's very handy because this trunk, as we're going to see in a short while, is enormous. If you're one of those people that misses Cadillac's fins, fear not, they're back. Admittedly, they're finlets at this particular stage, but owing to Cadillac's history, I expect these things to grow over time, and I think that would really be a great direction for Cadillac, if I'm honest, because I kind of want my Cadillacs batshit crazy and ultra fast, and I really don't care about the fuel economy. I'm probably alone with that. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Here we are in the trunk, and I don't know if you can see this, but this is the largest roller bag you can carry on a domestic flight, and it is way back there in the trunk. Big trunks are important for the Cadillac, of course, because the Cadillac and Lincolns are used in livery service, so you need to be able to jam a decent amount of luggage in there. We also get an interesting little cubby under this little cover here for additional storage, and as you can see, journalists fit quite well in the trunk, but you can also fit several journalists. As you can see, you could fit another large journalist in here as well. Overall, I'd give this trunk a solid 9 out of 10 for a sedan, which is pretty impressive. Cadillac has dubbed their new infotainment system Q, and in our particular XTS model, it combines this large touchscreen navigation system here, an infotainment unit, with this enormous LCD in the dash that replaces the entire gauge cluster. So let's take a look at these pieces separately. First, we're going to take a look at the gauge cluster, then we'll move over to the infotainment and navigation unit. Over here on the steering wheel, the system is controlled by this cluster of switches here. We have side to side, up and down, push to select, track up, down, volume buttons here. On this side, we have the voice recognition, we have cruise control, we have our phone off heated steering wheel and our collision control, collision alert, I should say, button here. This is very much like the other collision warning systems in the industry. It uses a camera that's up behind the rearview mirror to monitor traffic in front of you, and then vibrates your seat and alerts you via this display here, as well as the heads-up display in the vehicle to let you know that a collision is impending. Okay, so looking at this instrument cluster, what Cadillac has done is they've replaced everything with this LCD, and they've separated into several quadrants. So over here we have our speed limit info, and these are all adjustable. So you can see we have speed warning, we have cruise control information, we have essentially gauge duplication, tire pressure, and trip computer, etc. We have our audio section here. This can also be your phone or your navigation. If we were doing turn-by-turn navigation, the latest turn information would be displayed here. And if we move on to this third quadrant over here, we have our trip computer, as well as some additional gauges like timer, turn arrow, distance to destination. We can also have our speed limit shown up there as well. Over here in the upper left-hand corner, we have a fixed screen, which is a sort of a snapshot view of our navigation. So that's not zoomable. That's just the only zoom that it ever gets. And then over here, we have our usual fuel meter. And this section of the display shows things like your high beams on and off, your cruise control, what your cruise control would currently be set to, whether your headlights are on, etc., as well as a compass direction. Now, unlike products like Jaguar and Land Rover's LCD gauges, which really only have one look and feel to them, this display can be customized to a decent extent. We can go back to a more traditional 3-gauge arrangement here. As you can see, the animation is very good on this particular system. And again, in this particular setup, we have our usual navigation. We can convert to a little map in that screen. We can have just a regular needle look. Over here, we have our trip computer additional gauges. And then on this side, we have our infotainment options, phone, and navigation instructions. Now, going back to this particular screen, to the settings, and changing the display layout again, you can see there is a third look here, and that was what we were on before. There is a simple layout, which removes a lot of the information. So now we only have audio on this side, and we only have our fuel gauge over here. We have the balance layout, which we've seen, and we have the performance layout, which is a little bit interesting. I'm not quite clear why that exists in an XTS, which is really not a performance vehicle at all. As you can see, we get a tachometer over here, we get our speedo over here, and they've sort of moved all the other options here. So we have audio, phone, we have our navigation, and our vehicle information in this particular area, and you can toggle through the various aspects of the car, and it has these little animations which are pretty cute. And then the other area is this little window here where you can have your map, or you can have your speed, or just the needle look. This particular display, thankfully, does not run seemingly on the same software or same systems as the infotainment system that's in the center of the dash. So even though the system in the center of the dash has crashed on us 4 times this week, fortunately this display has never crashed. So the portions of this display that pull information from that other display, so like this navigation screen here, or if we're on this other option here and we're looking at our audio system information, when the main system in the dash crashes, these particular displays freeze and are non-responsive, but the rest of the gauges do function as you would expect. Moving back over to our center console, this is where I'm going to remind you that if you're not viewing this in high definition on YouTube, then go ahead and click that 1080p button, because you'll be able to see an awful lot more if you do. First thing to note with this system is, much like Ford's products and BMW's products, they've gone USB port crazy, which I really love. So there are 2 USB ports in the center console, and then there's one hidden in this little cubby right here at the back. Now, these ports all provide enough power to power and charge my iPad 3, which I think is great. And you can have all 3 devices connected at the same time. You can do voice recognition on all 3 devices as well, which is kind of interesting. But the way the system deals with this is it sort of merges all 3 devices together. So if we were to go into this audio screen here, and you can see right now we're on XM satellite radio. If we hit the media button, we move on to the iPhone here. If we browse the media, and we had more than one device plugged in at the same time, you would see duplicates if you had all my iDevices plugged in at the same time, because all my iDevices are synced, so they're all duplicates of one another. But if you and your husband or wife or kids or whatever had multiple different devices, an Android device, a USB device, an iDevice, etc., and you had different music on them, you could plug them in, and then you'd see all the playlists and songs as if they were on one device. It's kind of a handy feature. If we go back to the home screen, you can see we have our usual options of climate, phone, nav, rear climate control, which is kind of interesting because this one does have a 3-zone climate control system. We move along to the next screen, and we have access to Pandora, XM Weather. This is not a smartphone app. Pandora is a smartphone app. It requires Pandora on your phone. And we have access to our OnStar features as well. Now, I don't have particularly oily hands. My hands tend to be very dry, so this touchscreen system and these touch-sensitive buttons here don't really seem to respond that well unless I press pretty hard and linger my finger there on the buttons for a short while. And everything is touch-sensitive, so the heated seats, there we go, the cooled seats, the climate control buttons, etc., they're all these touch buttons as well, very much like Ford and Lincoln's latest products. Now, this system is a first-generation system for Cadillac, and there are a few bugs. As I've said, the system has crashed on us 4 times in a week and under 700 miles. The system also has some responsiveness issues sometimes. If you're pinching to zoom, which is a nice feature, then, it takes a while for it to respond. On the navigation side, this screen is kind of narrow. So the way that they've laid this out, we have these direct access buttons at the bottom. So, if I want to store the location that I'm at right now, I just press and hold, and all of a sudden it has stored North Rollins Road in Millbrae, and you can recall that just by hitting that button. You can store playlists on your iPod, songs on your iPod, XM satellite stations, all manner of things can be stored in these program buttons, which is very much like BMW's iDrive, but this nav screen is fairly narrow, and if you're in a city that has building information, we're not, but we were in downtown San Francisco earlier, and the building information tends to hide the roads, so we're going to choose our heading up view, so you can see the 2D view of the system. The voice instructions work very well in this system, and you can voice command your iPod, which is quite nice. You can also have access to the usual phone voice commands that you would expect. And we expect a few more apps, we're told from General Motors. They expect to add more smartphone integration apps in this system as time goes on. The system is not quite as intuitive as Ford's MyTouch system. It's not quite as snazzy as BMW's iDrive, but I think the system is more intuitive than Audi's MMI, and it's definitely better than Mercedes Command. It's more fully featured than Volvo's Sensus, and Acura's latest systems really just leave an awful lot to be desired. The only aggravating part of this system, again, is that crashing. As I said, we did crash 4 times on us. However, on the flip side of that, I'm not trying to defend GM here necessarily, but on the flip side of that, Ford MyTouch was really buggy in its first version of the software, and Ford was able to change that over time. So we expect the next revision of this system to improve. Now, as you can see, the system's other feature is now apparent, and that is that it has a proximity sensor. So as you can see, the display now has a little bit more room. So the map has gotten a little bit larger, and if I move my hand closer to the display, you can see that this row of icons and this row of icons here now appear. And if I remove my hand after a short while, they will pop back again. Overall, Q performs very well. It integrates very well with all of my latest iDevices, and I really couldn't ask for more than that, being the geek that I am. This system is very competitive with the likes of Audi's MMI and Volvo Sensus and some of those other systems in this segment. I do rate this just a notch behind iDrive in terms of ease of use, although this 11-inch LCD dash right here is very, very, very attractive looking. This is easily the best LCD disco dash that there is in the market. The Jaguar and the Land Rover LCD dash arrangements just don't offer this array of customization that the Cadillac does. So on the infotainment and gadget front, the Cadillac XTS receives a very high score. Out on the road, it's obvious that this engine might be the enthusiast choice, in something like the Cadillac ATS, but here in the XTS, where there's much more weight and of course this definite front wheel bias, it's less of an exciting option, to be perfectly honest. 304 horsepower isn't bad, but only 264 pound-feet of torque, and that torque arrives fairly high in the RPM range. Just doesn't compete that well with some of the other options in this segment. 0 to 60 in this XTS takes 6 seconds, and that's below the Volvo S60 with its 2.5 liter turbo 5. It's slower than the BMW 528i with its 2 liter turbo 4. It's slower than Audi's 2 liter turbo, which is only 211 horsepower as well in many of its models. And that's thanks due as much to the torque characteristics of this engine as well as that General Motors 6-speed automatic. And that 6-speed automatic shifts a little bit slower than the ZF 8-speed automatic sits in much of the competition. This is most obvious when you take a look at the 0 to 30 times of the Cadillac XTS, which are about 2.5 seconds, which is a decent amount longer than much of the competition, including those small turbos, which usually have a turbo lag problem and cause their 0 to 30 numbers to be a little bit long in comparison with other engine types. Now, that probably isn't so much of a problem for most buyers, as I don't see many buyers that are shopping in this particular segment as shoppers looking for an all-out performance vehicle. 0 to 60 in 6 seconds is quite respectable for this segment, all in all. You know, and that's something that most buyers probably wouldn't have a problem with. The Cadillac XTS makes up for this with an absolutely well-mannered ride. This has GM's Magna Ride suspension, which is an option in the XTS. But in this particular setup, the ride is very, very well controlled. Shockingly well controlled, I might say, because it's not floaty like you would expect. So if you've driven things like Jaguar or Mercedes air suspension systems, then the Magna Ride system doesn't feel like that at all. Those systems tend to have an awkward, very unnatural, floaty feeling to them. And the Magna Ride system doesn't feel like that at all. It does soak up bumps very well, but it gives you a very even highway ride and a fairly decent sporty ride. The XTS handles fairly well, although this steering is impossibly numb and ultra boosted. And so although the car handles well, there is almost zero feel for it. And so it's taken me a good number of days on roads that I know very, very well before I could even approach maybe 6/10 of this car's ability on the road, just because that steering wheel and that steering feel felt so odd. This steering wheel is a little bit thin too, so that doesn't really add to any sporting pretensions that you think the XTS might have at all. Fuel economy is a little bit lackluster in the XTS as well, although that's something that, again, that you would expect in this segment. It is notably below the BMW 528, however, as well as Volvo's S80 with its 3.2 liter base engine. We've been averaging about 18.9 miles per gallon in this car over 700 miles, and if we look at the lifetime average on this Cadillac XTS over its 3,100 mile lifetime so far, it's been averaging only about 17 miles per gallon, which really isn't that great. In contrast, the BMW 528, which is again their 2 liter turbo engine in the BMW 5 Series, for us we were able to average about 25 miles per gallon in mixed driving in that car. That is considerably better, and that was an all-wheel drive 528 as well. So you know, we want to compare apples to apples since the XTS is an all-wheel drive vehicle. Now, out on the road, the XTS doesn't exhibit the same torque vectoring abilities as some of the competition, which really makes this feel like your more traditional front-wheel drive vehicle that also has an all-wheel drive unit attached to it. And by that I mean that the XTS has really no ability to get even minorly tail-happy like some of the competition will out on the road. This Cadillac XTS checks almost all the right boxes for me except for price. And that's where the XTS really fails in my book, is that our particular model is $58,000, and we don't have all the options. We don't have radar cruise control, we don't have a sunroof in this particular model. The premium model, as I understand it, is in that $60,000 to $65,000 range, depending on your options. And the XTS in general starts just under $50,000. That makes the XTS really quite an expensive vehicle, definitely competing really head-on in the price point with the BMWs and the Mercedes in this particular class. And if I'm perfectly honest, if I'm out there shopping and I had that kind of cash to spend, I think that either A, I would buy a BMW or a Mercedes instead, or a Jaguar XF. They're probably a lot more fun. Or I would honestly shop for a Volvo, because the Volvo is cheaper and it's much better put together. You know, the XTS has a nice interior, but there are a few details in this interior that are just a little bit wrong and a little bit annoying, like that glove box and some of these trim problems here in the cabin. Compared to the Lincoln MKS, the Lincoln MKS seems to have none of the little tiny detail problems that I've seen in the Cadillac XTS, but really has a very similar quality interior overall to the Cadillac XTS. But it has a 355 horsepower twin-turbo V6 that is an absolute monster under the hood, and it torque vectors, and it's much, much faster and handles better. So on that particular face-off, I think this Cadillac XTS loses as well. If you happen to like Cadillac as a brand, though, you can't go wrong in the XTS, and it is a pretty car and it is comfy, but there are better options out there in the market.